And that's amazing because I just had a huge light bulb moment when you were sharing all that, because we're constantly looking for what is the thing, right?
Yeah.
What is the thing that young adults are looking for? What are they going to gravitate towards? Is it going to be more, like you said, is it more service oriented? Is it more devotional related, right? And everyone's constantly trying to test new things. And every year, it almost seems like there's a new article saying, here's what young adults are trying to look for in the church. But what you shared was really, at the end of the day, what they're looking for is purpose.
Yeah.
Right? They're looking for purpose and value.
We're up again, we're dancing in the love we know.
Aloha and welcome to the next episode of the Epic Ministry podcast. And today we have a very, very special guest joining us all the way from Washington, D.C. in the form of Mr. Paul Jarzembowski. Paul is the Associate Director for the Laity, working for the USCCB. He was a former Executive Director for the National Catholic Young Adult Ministry Association, and he's a husband, author, and presenter. So thank you very much for joining us, Paul.
It is my pleasure. Thank you, Malcolm, for having me and for having me here at with Epic Ministries here.
Well, you're in Hawaii. This is your first time, right?
The very first time I've been in the Hawaiian Islands, yes.
Yeah. Nice. How's your experience so far? We can leave out the scary part of Maui.
The experience has been incredible. One would first like to say it was the beauty of the landscape, but so far the beauty of the people that I've met so far has certainly surpassed that. And it's been a joy to meet all the people who we've encountered. And that so. In that sense, it's been a true blessing, and many more blessings yet to come.
Yeah. So you're probably not going to remember this, but we first met maybe about 10 years ago. You were presenting at LA Congress, and I was there. Epic Ministry was brand new. And we joked about bringing you over to Hawaii someday. And 10 years later, here we are.
Well, thank you very much for making that happen. I appreciate, if nothing else, your prayers have certainly helped along the way. So It's good to see you again.
Well, the best fruits take years to grow, right?
Absolutely, yeah. You never know where the seed is planted, and it now blossomed. So Good to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you, and we're glad that you're experiencing the true beauty of our culture here in Hawaii, right? We'll talk to Lisa about making sure that you're a mainstay, like some of the other guests we have. But anyway, we're going to dive in. Now, Paul is bringing us great wisdom from the USCCB, but also an extensive history with young adult ministry in particular. You officially work for the church up in DC, kind of like main headquarters in America, right? Was that something you always wanted to do growing up?
Strangely enough, I always wanted to work in Washington, and which was, being in church work, that's not generally a dream of many church workers, is to want to work in Washington with all the bureaucrats and politicians and all the folks there in DC. But I had a certain love of it. When I was in college, I was an intern on Capitol Hill, and so fell in love with the city. But my call to ministry actually began at World Youth Day in Denver in 1993. So I had an experience of the universal church at a very young age, and my eyes were open to seeing that universal church. And so to be able to work in DC, to be able to work in the universal experience of church was a dream of mine. So yes, I'd hoped to one day work in Washington, and for the last 11 years, I've been able to fulfill that dream.
Were you always involved in church growing up, or was that something kind of just popping up?
Yeah, I had been. I'm a cradle Catholic, and so had been. My parents were active churchgoers when I was younger. We did when I was a kid. It was my parish. We did parish carnivals. Did all of those things you do for a little parish growing up, and so did all those pancake dinners and special masses for kids and things like that. So as a kid, I was involved in my faith. I was an altar server. I was a lector, and I was a teen. I even was involved as a Eucharistic minister at a young age. So I was super involved. And then I got into I was slowly building on that. I said World Youth Day in the middle of my high school years really propelled me even further into that desire to be part of leadership. And so I've been, for the last 25 years, have been working officially, been paid by the Catholic Church in one way, shape, or another, in a parish, a college campus, a diocese, and now at the USCCB. So
Tell us about how you ended up with your first job in DC.
Kind of an odd thing to think, but it is very much like any other job where there's it's posted on the web and you fill out an application and you send in your resume. So it was very kind of boring in that sense. But I had been involved, you mentioned that I was involved with the National Catholic Young Adult Ministry Association. And so as part of that, I would be in Washington, DC for meetings, month after month. And I would meet what would be my now predecessor, and she would guide me as a volunteer executive director of a national organization. She would work with me, and so I saw what she did. And so when she announced her leave taking from the USCCB, I immediately went online. I immediately got my resume ready because it was an opportunity to do this work and to work in the particular Ministry of Youth and Young Adults at the Bishops' Conference. So it was just at the right time in my career working in a diocese that I felt I had kind of achieved what I needed to achieve at the diocesan level, and I felt ready to move on to that next level. So it really was kind of not too dissimilar to many young adults' experience of looking for the job and kind of stumbling upon a job that they always had dreamed about, and it was there.
Yeah, and that's interesting because at least, especially in Hawaii with a huge cost of living, right? It's a lot of young people, they don't see working for the church as a viable career path, right? It's kind of just a hobby that you do just to stay involved.
Yeah.
But can you give a word of encouragement to those who are possibly looking at a career in ministry?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think personally, it's certainly keeping yourself connected to a life of prayer and a life of faith. But as I think we always accumulate more knowledge and things like that, and we think we know everything. Well, we've watched every video on YouTube by Bishop Barron or someone like that, or we've been at every mass, and so we've heard every homily, and so we've read this book by this author or that author, and we can accumulate a lot of knowledge. And I think the key thing is to always remember, even as much as you know, there's always more to know. There's always more that's out there. The Catholic Church, its universal nature is so big. And so really knowing that even outside of your reality, where you are and what you have experienced thus far, there's volumes more yet to be written, more stories to hear, more people to meet. And so I think the best thing as people, if they have a desire to work in the church world, is to be always open to learning something new, because no matter what parish, diocese, or organization or apostolate that someone may be part of, you're always going to encounter new challenges, new types of people, especially working with young people. The trends and generations and all that change rapidly. So always be ready to learn. Always be ready to say, what I already know is good, but it's just a beginning of where I can go. So I think having an appetite for being open to new possibilities and new directions and learning new things, I think is a really good thing to keep in mind. Always turn to wonder, turn to curiosity. I think should be a good kind of way to start if you're looking in that direction. And the church, like any other career, is also a networking thing. So get to know as many people as possible. Learn all of the different types of people out there. Don't be satisfied with the small group you may already know. Yeah. But again, it's kind of like that learning. Get to know more people and build your network up, because that is really, I think, I hate to say sometimes where it's like not what you know, but who you know. Yeah. I think working in church is a little bit of both. It's about what you know, and it is about not who you know, but that you are aware of all the different people that are out there, because I think that will be a benefit to anyone working in church, that you have of experience working with a variety of different people that you're going to come across and encounter on that journey.
And it's funny because when you're sharing, right, we've been doing young adult ministry for a good amount of time, right? And after maybe a couple years of studying the trends, of watching young adults, you get to a point where you're thinking to yourself, we finally got something that works.
Yeah.
And then guess what? The generation changes and it's completely new ball game all over again. What you've been around for a good amount of time, good chunk of time. Have you seen any current trends or patterns in specifically young adult ministry that would be good to take note of?
Well, one of the trends that actually it's not even as current, it's actually been something that's been building on, but it hasn't left, which is one of the things that I'm here in Hawaii speaking on, which is on these ideas of moments of return. That as much as there is the disaffiliation crisis that's going on with many young adults in the practice of faith, there is still a religiosity, there's still a spirituality that is there. And amongst younger people, that draw to those moments is actually quite strong. So, for instance, whereas on a typical Sunday, only perhaps 15% of young adults will be going to church. On Christmas, on Easter, on Ash Wednesday, those numbers skyrocket, more so than their older counterparts. So more so than those in their 40s and 50s and 60s, young adults, especially those who are disconnected otherwise, are still making that connection to those moments. So it's good news. It's, usually when you talk about trends with young adults, it's like, okay, get ready for some of the bad news to be shared, some sobering news or things like that. But one of the trends that I've noticed is that there is a deep spirituality that is present. It's especially true across the United States that young adults that there is a deep sense of identity and spirituality that people have. I don't, when people talk about a godless generation, I don't see that with young adults. Now, I see that the practice is certainly not there on a regular basis, but every now and then there's a reconnection. Unfortunately, what happens in those reconnection times is that they're often not greeted with a sense of welcome or hospitality, but rather suspicion, distrust. Hey, you haven't been here in a while. Why? There's that, things like that, instead of a sense of welcome. And so they continue to stay away because when they do make those moments, they aren't exactly greeted with that. So that is a trend, and it's a trend that surprisingly has been going the opposite direction of all the other trends and with young adults. With many other trends, every year that passes, we see less and less weekly attendance. We see less and less engagement in baptisms, weddings, funerals, Catholic schools, just the numbers go down. But this one, every generation that keeps passing, the engagement with these moments of return goes upwards. So there's more of a marked difference. So the younger you are, the more likely you are to make a reconnection at those times. So it's an anomaly in the stats that, which is one of the reasons why I'm here to kind of share some insights as to what we can do to respond more effectively so that those moments kind of turn into milestones along a larger path. So that's just one of the things that is out there.
That's interesting, right? And I'm glad you brought that up, and how this is the one trend that seems to be moving in the right direction.
Yes.
Right? So we know Christmas and Easter are the ones that people come out for. What are probably some of the other ones as a parish leader to be on the lookout for?
Well, actually, an Ash Wednesday, I think, is even more so than even Christmas and Easter, because Christmas and Easter people often come usually because or with their families, whereas Ash Wednesday is one that they often make on their own, which for a young adult, coming on your own to a church is even more telling than coming with your family to church, because you've made that decision to make the thing. So Lent, and even more than Ash Wednesday, as crowded as our churches are on Ash Wednesday, the Fridays in Lent, huge. And so this also speaks to the domestic church, to the experience in the home and with your friends and family, that they will still give up meat on Fridays. In fact, out of all young adults, 6 in 10, 2/3 of young adults will give up meat on Fridays, even if they are not going to church. It's only about 40-50% who will come on Ash Wednesday, but it gets even more those who give up meat on Fridays. So that home commitment that personal discipline is very much so, very much a marked tell. But also weddings, and not just someone returning to get married, but the going to the wedding of a family or friend. Coming to church, they won't just go to the ceremony, but they'll come to the church because they know it's important to that couple, and they do that to honor the couple. And then, of course, funerals. It's one of those times where we don't think of that as an evangelization moment because it's such a pastoral care moment, but good evangelization and good pastoral care go hand in hand. And funerals are oftentimes when a lot of young adults are starting to ask some of those big questions, especially in their life. A funeral of a grandparent, of an aunt and uncle, or even as a parent or a good friend, can cause them to ask deep spiritual questions. But who's there to answer those questions for them? Who's there to walk with them? And so these are moments where a lot of young people are reconnecting with church for that day or for a short period of time. And so again, but are we walking with young adults on that journey who come to our churches in those moments? So those are a few others.
So really, it's entry points, right? It's being really conscious of where all these entry points into the church or back into the church. What are some of the other trends that you've seen in young adult ministry?
Well, and specifically on the ministry itself, we have noticed that there is not as much of an investment in our churches. This is one of the. So if I am going to bring in some sobering news, one is that we do not necessarily see a trend, even though there is a great need. In fact, perhaps a greater need now than ever before. The amount of resources and investment that we're making on this ministry sometimes shrinks, both on the diocesan level and especially on parish levels. There's often a trend to want to combine ministries. We know the common trend is to combine with youth ministry, but even more so, you combine it with many other ministries in the life of the church. Sometimes you're the religious ed director, the confirmation leader, the youth minister, the young adult minister, and you might have to do some sort of ministry with like sports or something in addition to all that. You get all of that combined in a parish together. I've even seen some where they're the facilities director in addition to that. So we're creating these generalists, which is causing the attention that our churches are able to spend on engaging young adults. That happens less and less. And because of that, there's less opportunities for those moments of encounter to happen. And I'm not saying that every minister has to be paid, but even just in general, the attention paid to the ministry, the investment of resources within the community, the investment of energy, even just space, is not there, but yet that could be a great opportunity for us. So I think that is a trend as I look at the national level. So anyone is listening to this thinking, is my parish the only one who doesn't get it or who is struggling to do this? They're not. It's a trend that's happening across our country. And it has ebbed and flowed over the last several decades. There's been times where there's been great investment, and then there's time where it takes back, and then it comes back again. So there's trends, and I watch this trend. And at the moment, it also happens in pockets where a certain area of the United States suddenly has an explosion of different ministries. Maybe a particular bishop has decided we're going to do this, and then he inspires his brother bishops for his diocese to do that. So we do see that in pockets, whereas in other parts it's less. So it really does. It's an interesting trend to watch, but it's always something that people should know they're not alone in this, and that's a trend that I see that's sobering, and that I wish would reverse and would move toward a greater investment.
Aside from like the moments that we identified earlier, do you see any things or on the church level, either on the diocesan level or even on the local level, where young adults are more flocking towards?
It depends whenever there is passion. And again, this gets back to this notion of investment. Whenever there is an investment of passion. So I have seen where there are parts of the country where there is a great investment in engaging young adults with ecological issues, and that young adults will flock because there's just such a passion in these churches around that. Other places, there's a great Eucharistic adoration. There's somebody with a great devotion to that takes the lead of it. That gets flocked. So I see these different pockets, whether it's social issues, devotional issues, whether it's somebody is rich in catechesis, so they've invested all this, and there's a great catechist of sorts that's kind of around a certain area. I see that happening. So these happen in pockets where there's a lot of investment and passion around a particular aspect of the faith. It draws people in. And it's not consistent, as I've seen across the country or even around the world, where it's one thing or another. It really does depend on who's in leadership, what the situation and conditions are within a particular diocese or location. For instance, if there's an area of the country where there isn't a lot of investment of diocese or parish resources, sometimes like an apostolate or a movement will kind of take that place and will have a lot of energy around it, and young people will flock to that.
Yeah.
So it really does depend on what the circumstances are. I haven't yet seen a trend. Some people will point to certain trends, but if you look back at the bigger picture and you see it from that global perspective, you learn that yes, that particular form of experience of Catholicism or ministry is important for that area, but it's inconsistent across the board. But the one consistency is it's usually where there is somebody with a certain passion for a particular type of ministry or different dimension of the Catholic faith, and if that energy is there, it will draw people. So.
And that's amazing, because I just had a huge light bulb moment when you were sharing all that, because we're constantly looking for what is the thing, right? Yeah. What is the thing that young adults are looking for? What are they going to gravitate towards? Is it going to be more, like you said, is it more service oriented? Is it more devotional related, right? And everyone's constantly trying to test new things. And every year, it almost seems like there's a new article saying, here's what young adults are trying to look for in the church. But what you shared was really, at the end of the day, what they're looking for is purpose.
Yeah.
Right? They're looking for purpose and value.
Yeah.
And when we have the right people in places, they can give or show young adults a sense of purpose and value. It doesn't matter what it is. Now, I'm not saying like everything's all, throw all the rules out and just do whatever young adults want to do.
No.
Right?
And actually, that's one of the things we sometimes default to is, well, let's just ask the young people what they want and let's then do it. The danger in that is that the imagination of a particular group of young people could be potentially somewhat limited. They may know what they know. They know that they were comfortable doing this, so let's do that. The wisdom of a ministry leader who's older in age or who has kind of seen a broader perspective can help them not just kind of go with whatever they just want, but can also discern what they need and what is out there. And even providing avenues to make sure that people don't always get what they want, and maybe they get some things that they didn't know they wanted, but that is out there as well. So yeah, I always find when people say, well, the first step is just ask them what they want and then build a ministry on that. I'm like, well, be careful, because that's where you could get, well, we're just having socials till the end of the time. Or the particular devotion or particular excitement about ministry of the leader is the only thing they do, as opposed to learning about the great breadth and universality of the Catholic faith, which is so rich. It's why we have such a big umbrella of sorts, because we have so much that we as a church are doing. And I think different young adults will find their place to where it needs to go. And being comfortable, if you don't get everybody, don't think that you're a failure, because lift up somebody else that's maybe near you who has a passion on something else and say, well, we do adoration really, really well. We draw people in, but there's people who aren't drawn to that's not their entry point into church. But, lift up those around you who are doing other types of entry points and cheer them on and say, oh, well, that would be a great place that you could connect into, and to that we all are kind of working together towards the building up of the kingdom.
Oh, for sure. Right. And And that's probably why the USCCB, our bishops, came up with this new framework, right? And listen, teach, send. Do you want to share a little bit about this? It's a great document, right? I've read it, and it's someone who's trying to ask the same questions that we're probably talking about now. Young adult ministry, what do I do, right? How do I make sure that I'm not just doing socials every single time? So listen, teach, send. There was a committee formed. It was in follow-up to a synod. Do you want to share more about what this document does for us?
You know, it's the story of the document itself is quite wonderful. It did begin with Pope Francis in a way. I mean, where does it all begin? I guess it begins with Jesus, but then it also began with young adults. But then Pope Francis was kind of the one who kind of lit the match that started this fire, that kind of moved us in this direction. In 2018, you know, he had a synod on young people, and because of that the bishop said, we too need to pay attention. Thank you, Holy Father, for kind of starting the conversation. And the bishop said, we want to continue that conversation and specifically ask, what can we say as U.S. bishops that speaks our language? First of all, we had to use, when Pope Francis and when bishops around the world speak about young adults, they use other words. They don't actually use the phrase young adult. Sometimes in the documents, they'll use the word youth, which we know in the United States means something different. Or they'll use young people generally. It's just a tough thing to translate, Jovinus or Giovanni, all those different words in other languages where they've kind of been able to encapsulate a sense of that age that we here in the United States kind of struggle with trying to define. But we've called it young adults for those who are over 18. And so we had to kind of speak in that language and really kind of speak how can we respond in this country? So there was a journey of committees were formed, and I don't want to get too boring and bureaucratic in steps, but listening sessions and consulting groups and bishops' committees and working groups, all that to be said, after several years, the Committee on Laity, Marriage, Family Life, and Youth, that's a mouthful. It is the committee I specifically work for at the USCCB. That committee said, we're going to take this up, and they really worked on the drafting element of it with a bishops' working group that initially led the draft, and then it went through a couple of revisions and took it to consultants, to other bishops, to key leaders, to young adults as well, to react to it, to give input. And also there were several processes, such as the Quinto Encuentro process, which was very prominent among the Hispanic Latino community in the United States. They did their own listening, so they did listening specifically with young people. So we listened to that listening. We did our own listening as well with other processes. And so the document was really steeped in a listening journey. And as a result of that, the bishops gave some thought around what would they respond to that. And they kind of crafted this narrative. And I credit Bishop Barron, who's the chairman of our committee, for really identifying one of the key things he remembered from the Synod on Young People was the Emmaus story. The Emmaus story was a very pivotal moment in the Synod on Young People. It was something that kept coming up in prayer and in discernment during that process. So Bishop Barron remembered being a delegate to that synod and said, let's frame our conversation around that. And so that's where Listen, Teach, Send comes from. It is essentially the three phases of the journey of Jesus and the apostles. First, Jesus listens to them, and then in response to that listening, he teaches them. And then ultimately, the end of the story has them being sent forth to proclaim that Christ is alive. And so that journey is the same journey that the U.S. bishops thought this should be a model for us as to how to really develop a ministry here in this country when engaging young adults, to go through that process. If Jesus did that for his companions, we can do no less for the companions that we are accompanying on their journey as well.
He's usually a good model to follow, right?
Jesus?
Yeah.
I'd say Jesus is a good model. Well, and this story is so rich, and it really follows perfectly on the Pope Francis's document, Christus Vivit. I mean, Pope Francis, the key message he wanted to send in his in his apostolic exhortation was Christ is alive, and young people should know that Christ lives in this world and in their hearts, and that living Christ, that exciting, dynamic Christ is alive. So what is the story where we learn that Christ is, the resurrection stories from scriptures are great tools to be able to say, how can we help young people discover that Christ is alive? And so this journey, of course, ultimately wants to lead a young person to know that Christ is alive in their life and that they're sent forth to proclaim that, to live it, to be Christ to others, that Christ lives in them. And so how do we do that? We have to go on this journey to get there. So that's essentially how the thought process went on this document. And then we had to put through all the things we heard from young people into this as well to say, okay, we're hearing this. This is the bishop's response to that. And this is they want to be heard. So bishops have unpacked listening in several different ways. Young people want to know about their faith. They want to understand what it means to be a person of faith. And so how do we teach it in a way that responds to their realities? And then young people want to, as you said, they want to leave their mark. They want to have a purpose. And really that's what sending is. It's sending them into their purpose of where God dreams them to be. So how do we as church do that? Sometimes it's around their vocation, what they're called to do. Sometimes it's around their engagement with the social world around them and through justice. Sometimes it's through their proclamation of Christ to their peers. Sometimes it's through their God-given leadership gifts that they can use to guide society and their church towards something great. So I think that's really the elevator speech of what this document is, but it really does respond to some of the trends that we're noticing in the church and how we locally can also start implementing some of these thoughts that the universal church has kind of been wrestling with over these last couple of years.
Yeah. What I like about it, it is a broad framework, right? It's not a specific, comprehensive to-do checklist of what young adult ministries should be or what ministries should do. Rather, it's what they should be, right? And a lot of times in our experience, what we've seen is without that framework, without that bigger vision, that's when we get lost in I guess we're only doing coffee and donuts as a young adult ministry, right? Or, we're only doing Bible studies as a young adult ministry. They all have to flow into each other.
Right.
What some of the responses have been like? And really, if you were in parish leadership or even just a young adult reading it, what should be the takeaways from that document?
Well, one, it's very tempting to dive into the middle section of that. When you engage with ministry with young adults, you really want to engage it from what can I do to what can I build for a ministry, like the Bible study or the coffee and donuts. That's all part of the teaching part. That's all part of once you have people in there. But is that rooted in? Is it based in a listening to their realities? Is it really what each young adult is seeking? And even that phrase, what they are seeking, that's even needs to be rethought because every young adult's journey is unique. So there isn't when people say, this is what young adults want in the church, that should be, first of all, that the document kind of calls us out for even kind of supposing that because it doesn't allow for the unique characteristics that God has for everyone's story. And some people's journey will be like what you think they want. So I think that's one thing. So one of the implications is what you're doing for young adults rooted in a sense of really understanding each person's reality? Mm-hmm. Does there need to be healing before anything can be done? Sometimes one of the parts of the document speaks about building trust and healing brokenness. Yeah. Sometimes the hindrance to a young adult reconnecting to the church is there's a fissure there. There's something there's a break, and there's a distrust. And so no matter how good of a theology on tap or how good of a donuts and scripture or a Bible study or even as precious as something as a devotional practice like adoration, no matter how wonderful it is, if the trust is not there, it doesn't matter. They won't come. So part of it is it before you get into what exciting things we can offer, has it been rooted in what we have learned and what we have listened to and heard and healed? And then on the other end, is the goal of a ministry with young adults to just get them to come to the event? Or is that just a catalyst for sending them on to a journey? Because Jesus could have said, look, you came to this table, we broke bread together, end of story. But that's not where the story ended.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thanks for coming. It was great. But the end of the story was them going out from there. So no matter how wonderful our ministries are, and even if it brings people together, the end goal is not to bring people to your church or to a group or to a program. It's to catapult them to be a son and daughter of God that's alive with the Spirit, that's infusing the world with the gospel. That's the goal. So I think that on the other side, are we doing enough sending? Are we doing enough moving them towards something, or are we just worried about getting them there? And so I think what the implications for a local person is to just really assess, am I doing this? Is it rooted in a listening, and is it serving a greater purpose of sending them towards the kingdom? And even the other thing that's unique about this document, I love saying this, is even, you may caught me what I'm saying. I know you're saying the word young adult ministry, and you catch me saying ministry with young adults. And the document very much uses the phrase ministry with young adults, and that's for a purpose, is that ministry with means that this isn't just something that those who are doing the young adult group or the person who's paid as a young adult minister does. Sure, it's definitely their job, but it's all of their job. It's the families of young adults work to engage in this ministry. It's their friends. It's the pastor. It's the usher. It's the person in the pew, 5 pews over from the young adult who just got there on Ash Wednesday. It's everyone's call to do this ministry. And when you ask all of them, are you doing young adult ministry? They may all look at you and say, oh, no, that's that guy's job.
Right.
But if you said to them, are you doing ministry with young adults? They go, well, they may have to rethink that and go, well, yeah, I guess I am. And so the document is really one thing that the bishops said that they wanted to do is they wanted to break this open from past documents that they have written on young adults, one of them being Sons and Daughters of the Light. That was very much focused on the professional or even the volunteer leader of a ministry, where Listen, Teach, Send differs from that or breaks or kind of expands that, is that it really is applicable to anyone who has an encounter with young adults, period.
And that's everybody.
And that's everyone. So ministry with young adults is a phrase that I like to use because then it means that, yes, Epic Ministry is certainly doing ministry with young adults, but then so is the pastor of Holy Rosary Church. And so is the person at St. Anthony's who's sitting in the back pew during, Christmas Eve Mass. It's everyone's ministry is included in that, including the young adults themselves. Another thing that made this document really unique was that it includes an introductory letter to young adults. That we don't normally do this in USCCB documents where we almost have the document divided in half, or this one, a first part of it was directly to the young people, and the bishops are speaking to them from their heart. Directly on their journey, no matter if they're engaged with their faith or if they're not as active in the practice of their faith, that part of the document is written to them. The rest of the document is written to the rest of the church that can walk with young adults, as I said, and that goes from the young adult minister to the pastor to everyone in the pews. And so that young people could see that they have been heard and that the bishops care and love them and long for them to actually be listening to them on the other side of the document.
Yeah, for sure. And honestly, if you haven't read it yet and really, we just talked about it. Ministry with young adults is for everybody. So everyone should be reading this document because it does give an insight as to the greatest need in the church is to get this demographic back. One of the things, so in line with that, and I want to just hear your thoughts on an observation that I've noticed lately. We always say that it's not about the numbers. It's not about the numbers. When we talk about a young adult group in our community on the parish level or in the diocesan level, And sometimes you have great big young adult ministry or ministry with young adult events, and then you have small ones or small groups that happen. And what I've begun to see, especially in Hawaii, is there's this thought that, oh, we'll just get who we get, which is fine, right? You ought to just work with who God is presenting before you. But it's almost becoming a crutch where it's, oh, we're fine just staying small. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, thank you for asking. I think it's the distinction between, again, an event, a ministry, and then the churches work with. An event can be small, but the church's ministry with young adults should not be small. In a way, if an event brings 5 people, that's fine, but events are not the sum total of ministry with young adults. They are a catalyst, they can be a direction, and we should always find ways to make those opportunities more accessible. So yes, I would always subscribe to keep building. I mean, the Lord kept saying, go out to the whole world. So again, we're not meant to be satisfied with just who's there, but again, making sure that if you're satisfied with the small number, make sure that you have other things as well for other people. And if there's 5 people here, 10 people here, 15 people here, 20 people here, 30 people here, well, now you add all that and it's no longer a small number. So you may need to just kind of, I think one of the things in thinking of it is not thinking about it as if your ministry with young adults is just your events, you may need to rethink how you look at ministry with young adults. Right. Because doing that forever, yes, then those events will be small, then your ministry will be small. But if your ministry is expansive, if it involves the families, if it involves other types of activities, if it involves just those one-on-one experiences with young people, that's just one person too. Yeah. If the sum total of that for a community adds up to a multitude, that should be our goal. So if an event is, and also if an event is only getting 5 people repeatedly, it may be time to rethink that event. Yeah. That maybe that's not what's drawing the majority of people in your community. Maybe again, going back to listening, and again, if it's rooted in listening, if it's rooted in trust, then no event will probably be small if it's rooted in those things. But again, I think it's just a matter of looking at events versus ministry. So I understand the need for being comfortable and kind of feel comfortable about having only a few people. And we shouldn't shame people into thinking that they're a failure for only capturing that. But what we can challenge, I think, our leaders to do is to think bigger than just that event. Yeah. Because events do not make a ministry. Yeah. Jesus did not have an event. If one could argue that his apostleship was, only got 12 people to hang out with him for 3 years. I mean,
and even then it was 3.
Even then it was really just really 11 and 3 even mostly. So I think that we can't beat ourselves up over it, but Jesus didn't have only one way. What he did with the apostles was certainly one measure, but what we did with the feeding of the 5,000 was another. And what he did on the seashore or with this person or the individualized relationship with every person he made a cure of. He had 10 lepers he cured, only 1 came back. Yeah. I think, but what Jesus didn't do is he didn't just say, I'm doing one thing and one thing only, and that's all I'm doing. Jesus encountered people in a variety of ways. And I think that's, our goal there. And I think if we look to do our ministries as multiple opportunities for encounter, then numbers will never be an issue. Right. They'll almost be an irrelevant point. And, even with the smaller numbers, how are you using those smaller numbers? Are you using, if only 5 people should connect with you for a particular opportunity, are you making that time you have with those 5 people incredible? Yeah. Transformative? Then that is the most successful young adult activity you could do, period. If you had 500 people, you couldn't do that. That's a whole different type of experience. So I think it really starts to range in what how you need to reframe what you do for ministry.
What I hear you saying, I got another light bulb moment just went off. It's because we can have our small groups. We can have our tight-knit communities on the parish level or in the apostolate level. Yeah. But the goal is always the extension of that ministry with young adult mindset, where it's no, we're not just getting 5 people on a Tuesday night. Rather, we're prepping the 5 people to reach the 500 they're going to meet throughout the week.
Right.
So it's another way to think about it in that sense. And it pulls away all of this focus and attention to who's showing up at a church.
Right.
Oh, I like that. It's something to think about for sure.
I mean, to really reframe our work with young adults, it will require us to step back. And I know that there's a lot of people who might be disappointed with the document that we didn't have a bunch of programs that they could simply just copy paste and just tell me what to do. Instead, it leaves it at that level of the 30,000 foot view. Because what we really want to empower is that God has given every one of those people who ministers with young adults, who's a lot of people now. Everyone has a creative bone in them, and they can use that creativity to think of new ways that through their gifts and the needs of young adults in front of them, they can be transformative. So it calls us to a certain sense of creativity and a certain sense of ingenuity of how do we, in our own unique way, and with the young adult that's placed in front of us, how do we make that an opportunity for them to encounter Christ? How do we then also encounter the Christ that's present in them? And when we do that, each of us kind of got that creative spirit inspired by this. I think numbers will become an irrelevant conversation in a few years if we really are true to this.
Yeah, no, I believe that. No, we went over a lot today, and
did.
I feel like we could go for another 2 hours. But that just means you got to come back to Hawaii, right?
Anytime.
Let's just wrap up with closing thoughts. And I want you to speak directly to the pastor or the parish leadership. And they all know how important ministry with young adults is. But maybe something to think about as they go through planning and then thinking about strategies for reaching and encountering more young adults.
I had a pastor once say to me, the way he looked at framing every ministry he did, every decision he made is, what would a 25-year-old think of this? And every change he made to the architecture of the church, whether it was a new pew or whether there was a new program or a new ministry they were developing or a particular message in the parish bulletin, he would stop and think, what would a 25-year-old think? And it framed all of his things to make sure. And it was an interesting tool for him to look at every work in the church through that lens. Primarily, his reasoning was, the young people all want to be 25, like all the teenagers and young people. They're all dreaming of one day being 25 years old.
Or they still think they're 25.
Well, and then the older people all wish they were 25 again. So if you can appeal to that 25 to 30-year-old, you've pretty much appealed to everyone, because either everyone wants to be it again or they're longing to be it. And so for him, it was a guide for him. And so I would say that to pastors and to parish leaders, are we making our decisions with that mindset? Do we, especially since this is a generation that is very hungry, is looking at life in new ways? The transitions of young adulthood are a ripe time for that infusion of the Spirit in their lives. There's a sense of searching for identity, for mission, for purpose. And what does our faith do but give identity and purpose and mission? So this is the greatest time to really bring the church's experience to the lives of people who I think are ready for it. So is everything in your church aimed at that direction? And that does involve investment too. And we talked before about one of the things that's a thing I see that's a sadness, is that we have a lack of investment or a lumping together young adults. And so I would also say, be bold and think about how can we invest, whether it's our resources or even finances, into making sure that ministry with young adults can happen and happen great in your community. Doesn't mean you have to have a young adult group, but is there some ministry way that you could invest in to make sure young adults know that they're loved, they're cared for? In fact, maybe one thing would be, this is maybe one last thing I would say, is the introductory letter that the bishops wrote to young adults could be a letter that a pastor could think about saying to his young adults. And is every pastor, is every parish staff, could they say those same words to young adults as the bishop said. And that's an interesting challenge for us, because if you can say, yes, I could say that, or we are doing that, then I think we've arrived somewhere. But so you take lead from the bishops, my bosses, and say, are we willing to also say this to our young adults? And part of that means we love you, we trust you, and we want to invest in you.
Yeah.
So I think that would be one thing to say.
That's powerful, for sure. And if we are all on the same page doing that, just imagine.
Just imagine.
Yeah.
Just imagine.
That's great. Paul, where can they find more of your work? And you have wrote some books that it's important to check out.
So I wrote 2 books, Hope from the Ashes and Hope for the Holidays. Hope from the Ashes is a book for church ministry leaders. Anyone, again, that's a lot of people, of course, but that one really is meant to leaders in our church of how we can make those moments of return possible, especially around Lent. And then Hope for the Holidays is actually meant for, it's something for everyone. Anyone who in any way around the holidays feels they need a reinvigoration of hope in their lives and maybe is on a way towards making a moment of return around Christmas or the holidays, what kind of journey can they be on? So that's written for them. So those are 2 books. They're available from Paulist Press or whatever online retailer they prefer to use. And so there's that. And then in terms of the bishop's document on young adults, if they go to USCCB.org and they just put in the search, Listen, Teach, Send, or Young Adults, it will likely come up. There's a URL that's really long that I won't get into here, but at the very least, just type in Listen, Teach, Send into the, I think even in Google, if you cite Listen, Teach, Send, USCCB, it'll come right up.
We'll link it to the podcast.
Exactly. That would be great. Or go to Epic Ministry and they'll help you. They'll guide you in that journey.
For sure. Well, thank you very much for jumping on. In a minute, I'm going to ask you, Paul, if you could close us out in prayer, but I want to invite you to pray in a very specific way. For the young adult that's listening, that's on the precipice of being more active in their faith. Can we gear that prayer towards them?
Let's do that. Let's
but
pray.
In the meantime, if you liked today's episode and you want to support the work we're doing at Epic Ministry, the easiest thing you could do is just give it a like, comment, and subscribe. That way we know that you're listening, that you're following, and we can keep making more of these episodes and hopefully invite more special guests on to share more about what's going on in the church today, especially with ministry with young adults.
All right. Good and gracious Lord, we give you thanks for this conversation today, but in a special way, we want to give you thanks for young adults and for the young adults who, wherever they are in their life right now, are searching, are curious, are maybe hurt, maybe broken. Lord, we ask you to inspire the rest of us to walk with them. And we ask you to put into their minds a knowledge that the church loves them, that the church cares for them, that the church thinks of them and prays for them and is concerned for the things that are inside their hearts and souls. May that knowledge that they know that the church loves them, and may the knowledge that we who walk with them must always listen, teach, and send them in a way that you, Lord, would listen, teach, and send them. Lord, together, let us walk on that journey. Let us take the next step towards your kingdom, wherever that leads us all. Lord, in a special way, we ask your blessing on those young adults. May whatever is in their hearts be healed, whatever questions be answered, whatever curiosities be fulfilled, and whatever despair, may they find hope. May they find hope in a loving community. May they find hope in a loving community that exemplifies the love that you, God, love all of us with. And we ask all of this through your Son, who accompanies us and journeys with us every day, who is our guide and our companion on this journey. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Amen.